Good morning, all. Good morning, all. My name is Carol. If you need me, Carol, like Christmas Carol. Thank you very much for that.
You made some kids happy too, to see them.
Oh, to see them? Yeah. It's a bunch. Okay, helps my glasses on. Our presenter this morning is Stephen Vaughan. He is a professional photographer and ornithologist. He has been photographing and studying natural history for more than 55 years. His photographs have been published in numerous books and magazines and calendars for publications including National Geographic, Audubon, and Arizona Highways. Let us all welcome Stephen.
All right, thank y'all for coming. First thing I want to kind of say is I'm no expert. The reason I say that is because how many times have we heard, we used to think, but now we know, right? And that's the science people talking. We used to think that eastern meadowlarks are one species. Now we just split one off here in southern Arizona. We used to think owls do this, or we used to, and now we know. Well, do we really know, or do we now think? So I do have a degree in ornithology, but even from my early years as a budding ornithologist, I always struggled with trying to put boundaries on things and saying this is the way it is. And the very first article I wrote was on boreal owls, which is not these. But I wrote this article literally based on observations, not on anything I have read. I published this article and I got so much flack because that doesn't happen. That's like, well, it happened this time. Now, I'm not saying that's what happens. I'm saying that happened. So there's a difference. So I don't really try to, so what I'm going to talk about are mostly observations of mine. It may go against what you read. I'm not saying what you read is right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what I see. So that's why I try to say I'm no expert, because I want to go out there like a complete novice. I know nothing. So when I'm out there, I'm not making assumptions that this is going to happen or that's going to happen. Because as soon as you do that, that's what you see, right? You know, it's confirmation bias. If something's going to happen, if I believe this bird's going to do such and such, then that's what I'm going to see it do. Whether that's actually what's really happening, the subtle differences. Okay. So, I'm just going to ask you to imagine an owl. Picture an owl in your head. Not the one I just showed, but anyone. I don't care. Picture an owl. Okay? And when you're picturing this owl and you're thinking about an owl, what are you thinking about? Their silent flight. They're hunting at night. Their incredible night vision, their incredible hearing, right? All these things we know about owls. Well, that's true for some of them, but it's not for others. So again, what we know may not really be right. So I go back to what we think. What we think today is this, or this is what I think today. Because again, I could be wrong. So how many people pictured that? A great horned owl. That's the most common owl. That's probably the one everyone has seen. They're found pretty much anywhere and everywhere. They're in your neighborhood, I can almost guarantee it. But how often do we see them? We don't. So maybe you didn't picture this one, but I bet you pictured a big round facial disc. Big eyes staring at us, right? Okay, before you say this guy doesn't know anything about Pygmy-Owls, I know these aren't Pygmy-Owls. I'm going to get to that. Okay. But we know owls have these incredible facial discs, and that's to funnel sound to their ears. It's the same as doing this. The other thing is they have muscles connected to these facial discs, and they can move the discs around just like we can move our hands around. So owls can hunt. Some owls can hunt in total darkness. Now that doesn't mean they can live in total darkness. A barn owl and a great gray owl can both hunt without seeing their prey. But they can't fly around in total darkness in the woods. They don't echolocate. Okay? So the sense of hearing does help them locate prey, but they still need some light to locate prey. Now we think about owls having this incredible night vision. Well, that's true. Some of them do. And I'm gonna veer off for a second here. There's what I call nocturnal owls and the owls that are not nocturnal, okay? Some owls have incredible eyesight for finding things at night. They can see at night better than we can, significantly better. Probably all of them can. But that said, these owls that have great night vision don't really have very good vision during the daylight hours. They don't see good detail. They don't see these small things way out there because that's not the way their eyes are designed. They're designed to catch a lot of light, and that light catching ability limits how sharp their focus is and how sharp their vision is. So the non-nocturnal owls, I'll talk about this a little bit more, are different. They have incredible eyesight and they don't hear as well, but they also don't have that incredible facial disc that we see on the traditional owls, right? So if you look at these two guys, their facial discs are pretty minimal. So theoretically, they're not going to hunt as well by sound as by sight, and that is the case. Both of these owls will hunt during the day, and it's also interesting if you watch owls that are kind of what I call the nocturnal owls. If you watch them when they're out there and they're starting to locate prey, they do this really cool head bobbing thing. It's like their head goes from here to here to here. And what they're doing is they're listening here, they're listening here, they're listening here, they're listening here, and they're triangulating on their subject. Okay? And by doing that, they can zero in on what they're hunting. The sighted owls, the more diurnal owls, daytime hunters, they don't do that as much. When you're watching them and they're locating prey, they see something and their head doesn't move. They're like, there it is, I'm watching it. They move it around a little bit, but it's a total different behavior. It's like, okay, I can see this thing. I don't need to listen to see if it's down there. So they do have incredible vision, much better than ours, and much better than the nocturnal owls. Okay, how many species of Pygmy-Owls are there in Arizona? Trick question. What's your answer?
3.
You cheated. But that's an answer. Is it the right answer? Well, who do you ask? Do we ask the American Ornithological Society? If we do, you're incorrect. Do we ask the International Ornithological Union? You're correct. They don't agree on whether there's 2 or 3 species of Pygmy-Owls. So again, we used to think, now we know. Well, I'm not saying there's 2 or 3, but I'm going to talk about 3 different owls, Pygmy-Owls. And again, I was convinced the first 2 years I watched Pygmy-Owls that the mountain Pygmy-Owl was a separate species. The 4th year I watched them, I got confused. So that's back to, I used to think and now I know. Well, now I don't know what I think I used to think I do. So right now, I'm not going to say whether they're 2 or 3. I don't know. But I can tell you, as we go through, I'll tell you why I thought they were. And now I can tell you why I'm not sure they are. So there's northern Pygmy-Owls, mountain Pygmy-Owls, and Ferruginous Pygmy-Owls. We have theoretically all 3 in Arizona. The northern pygmy-owl is, as the name says, it's a more northern species. It occurs in the northern Arizona, and by the International Ornithological Society, it kind of stops probably in the Phoenix area, give or take. The bound pygmy-owl is a southern bird. So essentially, we have them here in southeast Arizona, and then they go south from here. They don't go north. And then we have the Ferruginous pygmy-owl, which at this time everyone believes is a different species. And they're really what I call a desert rat, so to speak. So the northern pygmy-owls have well, they actually both have a huge range, but northern pygmy-owls have a huge range, and throughout that range, they vary in color. They come in a really gray to very rufous. I mean, that almost looks like a Ferruginous pygmy-owl there on the right. Well, it's not. If you notice, and again, I'll show another slide that'll confuse you even more. Northern pygmy-owls, this band is white. Ferruginous pygmy-owls, that band is rufus. Okay? That we thought we knew? I'm not so sure. I'll show you why here in a minute. Oh, the other difference is, well, we'll get to that in a second. Northern pygmy-owls, the spots on the head, are spots. They're just teeny little spots. The Ferruginous pygmy-owl, those spots are elongated, so they're like a little streaky spot. So that is different. So the Ferruginous pygmy-owls, again, here's what I'm talking about. Those are spots, and they're streaky spots. So what's this bird? It's got white bands and it's got streaks. This one was at the Desert Museum in Tucson for years. It's no longer there. And I've been trying to contact them to say, where did that bird come from? Because it could be a Ferruginous pygmy-owl, but it's nothing like any of the ones we have here in Arizona that I've seen. Okay. So they do look different, and there are different species of Ferruginous pygmy-owls. In Arizona, we only have Ferruginous pygmy-owl, but in the U.S., there's some Ferruginous pygmy-owls in Texas. They're a separate subspecies. So ours are called cactus Ferruginous pygmy-owls, and they were listed as endangered and or threatened for a while, then they took them off, and they're currently trying to get them back on. So here's some range maps. What I can't find is an International Ornithological Union's map of northern pygmy-owls, because if you look, this map includes the mountain pygmy-owl. So this is what the mountain pygmy-owl range is. That's the Ferruginous pygmy-owl. And again, you can see they barely make it in southeast Arizona. So this northern pygmy-owl, I'm not sure where the northern would actually stop if you separated them into three species. So, give you just some kind of rough ideas of what we're talking about. Pygmy-owls are earless, right? Not so much. They do have ears, plumicorns, but they're small. You rarely see them, but there they are. Pygmy-owls have eyes on the back of their head, or so to speak. So why are they there? Okay. Couple theories. They believe that predators aren't going to attack something when their prey is looking at them. Good theory. The other theory is birds that mob pygmy-owls are less likely to mob them if they're being looked at. So if I'm a bridal titmouse and I'm going to mob this pygmy-owl and it's looking at me, I'm probably going to wait a minute. But if it's not looking at me, I'll go for it. Well, are these guys looking at me or not looking at me? I don't know. So I think both of them kind of make sense. It also could be because they look cool. So also the juveniles on the mountain pygmy-owl or northern pygmy-owl don't have spots. So it's not until they molt into their first their next plumage do they get the spots on them. So you can kind of ID whether it's a juvenile or an adult just by looking at the spots of the head. Can I tell her something?
Sure.
When we get done, write my email address down, and if you send me an email, I'll send you the notes, or anybody else that's interested.
Oh, awesome.
That way you don't have to write everything. You can write if you
And
want.
she's gonna sneak out and go to that kid's one too.
Okay,
So
all
thank
right.
you. We'll-
But I'll be glad to send you the notes of what I'm talking about.
Thank you.
It'll probably be different than what I'm saying, because I'm not reading my notes. So yes. Sexual dimorphism, meaning the sexes are different. Well, in most raptors, the females are actually larger than the males. It's called reverse sexual dimorphism. Lots of theories out there on why that is. One of them is a larger female can produce larger eggs. The other one is when you have dimorphism, they can hunt different prey items, which makes sense, but that doesn't explain the reverse dimorphism. Because in most species, the males are larger, but not in most raptors. Another theory is, and it seems to show up, the more aggressive and the more predatory, they're all predators, but how do you word it? But the more aggressive raptors tend to have more sexual, the dimorphism is bigger. So like in Cooper's hawks, it's huge. They're in a very aggressive species. The thinking is the female can protect the young from the male. So from cannibalism. That sort of makes sense, but it doesn't make sense for a male to eat its young either. So it doesn't happen in bears. Well, it actually does happen in bears. It doesn't happen in a lot of species. So why is the reverse sexual dimorphism there? I don't know. I actually wrote a paper on it when I was in college, and that was my answer. I said, here's what we think are possibilities, but we don't know. We don't know. But here are the females on the left, the males on the right. It's a little allopreening, it's a little courtship thing going on. The other thing that I noticed on all the Pygmy-Owls that I've observed is the females' tails during the breeding season are real red. They're kind of torn up. When these birds come in, they perch on the outside of the hole, like a woodpecker. Well, they're using that tail to hold themselves up, like a woodpecker. So the theory of the reason they say that the females is so warm is because she's perching out there more than the male. But that's not true. The male actually perches out there as much as the female. I think it's just rubbing inside the nest, or just the chicks are rubbing it. It's just something going on. But there's definitely, when you see it, it's like, wow, she's pretty warm. And it could be she's just not taking the time to preen. They may not necessarily be worn, they're just not put back together for preening. Same thing on the Ferruginous Pygmy-Owl. That female's tail, it looks pretty rough. I don't know why, but there it is. So the Pygmy-Owls, when it's time for courting, it's really cool if you have the opportunity to see. They both get really excited about life. The males go around, they're calling constantly. The males are grabbing food, they're saying, hey babe, look what a great provider I am. Look at all this stuff I've given you, or I'm offering you. And then he flies around to all these cavities and he says, hey babe, check this one out. Hey babe, check this one out. Which one do you like the best? Well, the female is actually the one who decides which one she likes the best. But the male tends to be, the males that have more cavities tend to be more successful than the ones that have fewer choices. Maybe the females really do know how to pick the best nest site. Not just saying. We don't know. But it's just really interesting to watch. I mean, they can be up there calling for 20, 30 minutes and just nonstop, and continue calling. It's really cool to watch. So, and again, during the courtship, he'll bring her treats, so to speak. And again, they do the grooming thing, which is also fun to watch. And then if things go well and they decide that they're gonna work this relationship out, they mate. And the mating is done in a second. They call it a cloacal kiss. Essentially, they just touch and that's it. They don't seem to be enjoying it much. They just want to get the job done. But there is an awful lot of excitement around the whole thing. I mean, they're just super excited about what's going on. So after mating, it comes time for nesting. Again, the female decides which nest they're going to take. My experience with northern Pygmy-Owls, and every nest I've found, and this is not the only place they nest, has been in an aspen. Every one. They do nest in other trees. They're secondary, all of them are secondary cavity nesters, meaning they're nesting in somebody else's abandoned nest. They're not making their nest. As a matter of fact, sometimes they will remove material out of a nest cavity. They essentially go in and they drop their eggs on what's available or what's there. They don't do anything to make a nest. The mountain Pygmy-Owls that I've found have all been in sycamores. It could be my search image. You know, I'm expecting to find them in a sycamore, so I look in sycamores. I may not be looking in other places. That's why I'm not finding them. But every one I've ever found has been in a sycamore. And the sycamores, they can be secondary cavity nesters. Or in this case, it was where a branch broke off and it rotted out inside and it created a cavity for them to use. And then the Ferruginous Pygmy-Owls, currently, they're almost all nesting in saguaros. That is not historically the way it's always been. Historically, they were really more of a riparian bird, so they did a lot with cottonwoods and whatnot, but for whatever reason, they've shifted away from the larger riparian areas to more the desert habitat with grassland and small riparian zones. So they're going down into, and I'll show some photos in a bit of the habitat, but most of the hunting, yes.
How long what is the sequence? Do they pick their nesting site and then mate, or is there enough time between mating and egg laying that they can do the mating and then pick out the abode they're going to raise them in? How long after that, the mating, do they lay the eggs, and have they already selected their nesting site?
Good question. Yes. They mate before, during, and after egg laying.
Oh.
So they're definitely mating during the nest selection period. They're mating during egg laying, and they're actually mating after the eggs have been.
With one male, or are they promiscuous?
What we think, it's one male. And I don't think they've done any, I don't know if they've really done enough, or done any DNA studies to see if the chicks are all from. They have with a lot of other species,
Yeah.
but they haven't, as far as I know, with Pygmy-Owls, so I don't know. They are fairly territorial, but their territories are relatively small. They'll nest within about a half mile of each other, and you can actually be standing at one nest and you can hear another one. So from the ones I've seen, they're not within sight, but they're within sound. Because there was one morning I was watching this male, and he just kept calling and calling, and I kept going, why does he keep going? Because the female wasn't, and he was looking in a different direction. Well, then, I kind of walked in the direction he was looking, and when I walked, probably a couple hundred yards down, I could hear another one calling in that direction. So he was hearing one that I couldn't hear, but it was probably a little over half a mile away. So right now they seem to need in Arizona saguaros. In Texas, they're using man-made nest boxes. They've been very successful with them in Texas. We haven't tried that here. I think Tucson Audubon is actually working with the DOW to maybe try some nest boxing things with Pygmy-Owls here. But as far as I know, they haven't done that yet.
Do they have to depend on another bird to make the hole, say like a Gila woodpecker or
Yes.
something?
And that's a great question. They prefer the smaller holes from the smaller woodpeckers. They don't seem to like the flicker holes. The western screech owls love the flicker holes. The flicker holes are bigger than they need. So they want to have the hole as small as possible. So they can squeeze in what predators can.
But they don't make the hole.
They do not make the hole. I have never heard of them actually enlarging the hole either. I'm not saying they don't. I've not seen it and I've never heard anyone talking about it. They could, especially in the saguaro. I think it's probably soft enough if they need to make it a little bit larger. But if you think about a Gila woodpecker cavity, it's big enough for a Pygmy-Owl. So they don't really need to make them larger.
Do they mate for life?
They seem to, yes. So it seems like the same pair come back, and if they lose a mate, then they obviously pick up a new one. And they're relatively, they tend to stay, they don't migrate. Their territories are a little bit larger in the non-breeding season than during the breeding season. During the breeding season, they actually kind of protect a relatively small area around the nest site. Outside the breeding season, I call it their range expands, but they don't migrate. Now the northern Pygmy-Owls may drop in elevation and they move a little bit, but they're not what you'd call a migrant. They don't head south for the winter, so none of the Pygmy-Owls do that. So feeding a growing family, it's a lot of work. The ones I've seen have had 3 to 4 young. They can have up to 7, which I can't imagine, but it's possible. What I see with Pygmy-Owls is they hunt all day long during the breeding season. They hunt all day long outside of the breeding season, but they are what I would call crepuscular and nocturnal when they don't need additional food. If I can get enough food in the crepuscular, late afternoon, early morning to get by, I'm not going to be flying around in the middle of the day. Too many predators out there. But when I'm feeding a family, I am. And what I see with these guys is during the breeding season, they're really active right after the sun comes up. It's almost like they're waiting for it to warm up enough. And the reason that would be is one of their staples are reptiles. They're waiting for it to warm up enough for the reptiles to get moving.
I'm amazed he got off the ground. It looks like she with her tail got off the ground like that.
Yeah.
Man, wow.
They will take things up to quail size. So they'll take things much larger than they are, and they can't carry it away, but they can capture. And it's like, they don't know they're this big. So how big's a Pygmy-Owl? It's that big with a tail. They don't know that they're a pygmy. That's right. They are fairly aggressive, but they do have predators, so they do need to be careful. But yeah, I remember when I got home and I'm looking at that rat has to probably weigh almost as much as that female. Because mammals are a little heavier than birds. And if you strip all the feathers off this bird, they're not much bigger than that rat. So how do they work out? So same thing here. With these guys, it was probably, I'd say 90% reptiles. A few birds, a few mammals, and a few insects. With these guys, the number of visits were the most with insects. But by mass, the largest number would be reptiles. Because reptiles, I mean, it takes a lot of little bugs to make the size of a lizard. So the birds and mammals were really a small portion of the diet. It was mostly insects with these guys. With these guys, it was mostly reptiles and amphibians. Well, reptiles, I didn't see any amphibians. So once the breeding starts, early in the breeding season, the chicks are born, they can't thermoregulate. They can't moderate their body temperature. So not only does the female have to sit on the eggs for 28-ish days, 4 weeks, she has to sit with the chicks for another 10 days to 2 weeks is the norm, because they can't thermoregulate. So she needs to stay in there and keep the chicks warm. So during this window of egg laying through the thermoregulation period, the male is the sole provider. He's out there doing all the work, grabbing the food, bringing it to the nest or bringing it to a perch and calling the female out. So typical with them is the male goes out and hunts, he comes back and perches somewhere and calls for the female. The female comes out, he gives her the food, she goes back in, and then he goes back out hunting. That's the norm. That said, he often will take it right into the nest, especially when she's in there. Once the chicks are able to thermoregulate, the female starts hunting also. So when she's out hunting and he's got something, he comes back and he does the same thing. He calls and calls and calls and say, hey babe, I'm here, I got food, where are you? Now what the books say is the male won't take the food into the chicks. And most of my experience with them, that's the case. He'll wait, at one point he waited an hour. He was calling off and on for an hour, but the female was out hunting. After an hour, he ate whatever it was and then flew away. He was like, you know what, I'm willing to wait for a bit, but you know, you tested my patience here. So he flew off, and there were a number of times where I did see him leave with the prey because she wasn't there. But I also saw with the mountain pygmy-owl, I didn't see it with these guys, I did see the male go into the nest when the female was not there. The books say that they don't do that. The reason the books say they don't do that is you can't sex these things unless they're sitting side by side. If I see the bird flying in, I don't know whether it's the male or female. They're essentially the same size. So how do you know that? I mean, we're assuming that, okay, that's the female going in every time. Well, oops, back. With this guy, one year, the male twisted his feather. So you could tell the male when he was going into the nest. So I did confirm that it was the male going into the nest with food. I was pretty sure it was happening because I kept looking at it going, it just didn't look like the female. You kind of get a gut feel, you're not positive, but it's like, yeah, it just doesn't seem like the female. The male, when he comes in and he's perching and waiting for the female, he calls and she comes, and you can hear this little contact chatter. It's going back and forth, and she goes back in. But when he comes in, he has this call that's different than the females. So there were a number of times where the male came in, I heard him calling, no contact call, and then a bird flew into the nest. I thought, God, that's probably the male. And so I contacted a couple people in the know, and they said, that would be very unusual. We don't think that happens. I just said, okay. So then I was able to get photos of the male actually flying in. I said, yeah, that's the male for sure. He is going in. He probably wasn't feeding the birds, the chicks in there, because he didn't stay in very long, but he was going in with food. So again, that's where we used to think, now we know. Well, I'm not saying we know, but it did happen more than a few times.
Does that imply if the female dies out on her hunt, that those chicks are gonna die? If he doesn't go into feeders?
Could be. Now, the female can raise young without the male. That has been documented. I don't know if it's ever been documented of a female dying and a male.
Right.
I mean, that's been documented in a number of species. Pygmy-Owls, one of them. Great gray owls are another, that the female was able to raise the brood alone. But I would, obviously, it's probably going to have to be late enough in the nesting cycle where the chicks are able to survive on their own. And the first year I watched these guys, the male disappeared about 10 days before fledging. Just never came in, never saw him, never heard him. So my assumption was a predator got him. Because we never had that food exchange. He never came in and called again. I can't confirm for sure he was gone, and I can't confirm that he wasn't one of the ones going in. But from everything I've watched that season, all of a sudden it just stopped. It seemed like the male was gone.
Does
And
the
she
food
did
have
great.
to be regurgitated to the babies?
No, they're just, they go in and they tear it up. So they're taking in prey whole, and then the female tears it up for the chicks. So, and again, from my observation with these guys, is the male doesn't seem to be tearing it up and feeding the chicks. He's just going in with it and leaving it. Now I can tell you with screech owls, the males aren't supposed to feed the chicks either, but they do. I have a motion camera in my screech owl box, and I've seen the male feeding the chicks.
Tearing it up and
Yes. We used to think, now we know.
Did I hear you say 40 days they incubate the eggs?
28,
28?
4 weeks.
4 weeks, okay.
4 weeks. So
Then
it's
how long before they're
about 10 days to 2 weeks. And a lot of that depends on the temperature. If it's warm enough, she may be able to leave at 8. My screech owls this year left after 3 days the female was out hunting. And the chicks were nowhere near ready to be thermoregulating, but it was warm enough, at least. It seemed to be. They all survived. So then when the early nesting stuff's going on, you don't see anything except a hole. You see the female go in and come out. That's it. About a week or so before the chicks fledge, so about 3 weeks in, the chicks will start peeking out, or a chick will peek out. First it's one, and then, another couple days later, it's another one, and there's 3. This particular nest, the 2 holes, it's all one cavity. So the females sometimes would go in and out of the top hole, but usually they use the bottom hole. As they get older, they become more comfortable looking out. So they'll actually stick their head out and be looking around. Initially, when they look out, literally, they may just peek above the opening, and then they drop back down. If you move, they drop back down. But as they get used to life on the outside, they get more tolerant, and they're looking around and they stare at you and they don't move. So going kind of back to the incubation and whatnot thing. Generally speaking, owls start incubating when they lay the first egg. So depending on how many days apart it takes to lay an egg, it can be a long period of time between when that first egg's laid and the last egg's laid. So if the female starts incubating with the first egg, that first egg is going to hatch way before the last egg. Pygmy-Owls, it appears, really don't start incubating until the 3rd egg is laid. So although the female's in there, and this is something I see with my screech owls, the female's in the box with that first egg, but she's not laying on it incubating. She's standing up over it. So like with my camera looking straight down, I can't see the egg unless she moves, but she is not down on it with the brood patch covering it. She didn't start my screech owls don't start incubating until the 3rd egg. She doesn't even do anything other than stand over the eggs until that 3rd egg is laid.
And how many eggs will they lay?
5. My screech owls have done 4 1 year and 5 3 years. So, and they're laying them every 3rd day. So it's 13 days before first egg and last egg. But when they hatch 1 day apart. They're not hatching 13 days apart. Okay, so that incubation makes a huge difference. Like if you look at snowy owls or great horned owls, you can have a chick that's like this big and a chick that's this big in a nest. These cavity nesters don't seem to do that. Yeah.
Is there a noted survivability rate as the mother matures? Or do they just grow up on average, each different clutch? Or brood?
So again, from what I've seen, and I know my female's been there for 2 years now, for sure. I think it's 3, but for sure 2, because we banded her last year. It seems to be, the success seems to be more related to what the male can bring in than what the female can bring in. Because he's doing the majority of it, especially during that first window, that first 2-week window. They're gaining 60% of their weight in that first 10 days. So they're just growing exponentially that first week and a half. And after that, it kind of tapers off. So I think if the male is more older, more successful, I think that probably does. But I can't answer the question for sure. Thank you. But yeah, my female this year, she was more successful than the male as far as bringing stuff in. And she started hunting 3 days after the eggs hatched. And that's not by the book, but she didn't read the book. So these guys fly really fast. What I've read about them, they kind of fly like a woodpecker. They flap and then they glide and they do this undulating. And that's the way they're described. I don't see them doing that. Now, it could just be the ones that I'm watching aren't doing it. But these guys, they're just direct and they're fast. They're just like bullets. But even when you see them out of the corner of your eye and it's just a glimpse, you know what it is because they've got this giant head sticking out. And that's, there it is. And again, they seem like they're faster than everything else that I'm watching. So when I'm kind of standing there looking at the nest area, I'm not looking at the nest. So if I'm looking at the nest, I'm not going to see the bird until it hits the nest. I'm just kind of staring, there's the nest, I'm just kind of staring into space and trying to expand my field of view. And I look for motion. And as soon as I see the movement, then I follow the movement. But so often, I mean, it's incredible how fast they're flying. So this is a half a second. So it's coming in over here, halfway, coming in, and it's already in half a second. It's fast. And the other thing that 99% of the time they do is when they come in, they don't even stop. They don't land and look around. It's like when they hit that nest, their head's going in at the same time. They don't stop. So it's really incredible to watch. It's like, man, I mean, they're going so fast. How do they hit this hole that's this big?
Did you take all these pictures locally or?
In Arizona, yeah. Actually in the Tucson-ish area.
Barn owls was.
I was just wondering if some of these are like on the San Pedro or.
No, these aren't from San Pedro.
Barn owls, same thing, 6-inch skull.
Oh, yeah.
You can't even see it slow down.
Yeah.
It just, you hear the feet hit.
Yeah.
But it's just like one continuous motion.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yes.
So they have like the long tail and the kind of broad wings, and the accipiters kind of have that same thing. Is that all related?
Yeah, they're kind of forest owls. So yes, having that bigger rudder. Yes. The other thing that's interesting about them is they don't have silent flight. Their feathers aren't soft like a great horn or whatever. You can,
So they're not silent?
they're not silent.
They just hit.
But why is that a big deal? They're hunting by sight. If I'm hunting by sound and my wings and body are making noise when I'm trying to hunt, I can't hear what I'm trying to find because I'm making too much noise. These guys are sight hunters. Being silent isn't relevant. So they have to be pretty close. It's not like a raven that you hear flying 100 feet over your head go, but you can hear them when they come by close. Kind of when they leave, it's kind of interesting because I don't have many shots of them leaving. Because one time they'll come to the hole and they're gone. The next time they'll come to the hole and they'll look around for a second, and then you get, okay, here they go. And next time they come and they look out for 30 seconds. And it's like, okay, come on. So typically these shots I'm getting of them leaving, when she sticks her head out, I just start holding the shutter button down and hoping I get one. Yeah. So again, it happens. Again, they're just so fast, it's crazy. So, it's not easy being a pygmy. Everybody harasses you. Everybody, everything that's not an owl. Actually, the owls probably harass them too. Everybody's harassing them. The jays are brutal. The worst things especially for the mountain pygmy-owls, are the acorn woodpeckers. You think of acorn woodpeckers, seriously? Acorn woodpeckers are nasty. Jays will grab them and hold them down on the ground and pluck at them, and you would think, you would think the owl would be able to handle the jay, but not necessarily. The bridal titmice are coming in and harassing them. Hummingbirds, for crying out loud. Really?
Well, they're always pugnacious anyway.
Right, but it's just like, yeah, so come on, really? So this is one of the times where this broad-billed hummingbird chased the owl into the hole, and it's like, seriously, dude? And the hummingbird's hovering outside the hole, and I'm thinking, oh, this is gonna be good. This is not gonna end well for that hummingbird. So they all come shooting out, and the hummingbird's like, oh, geez. And the acorn woodpeckers again chased them. And so that's like, when you think back to them not sitting on the outside, that's why. It's like, hey, I'm getting in this hole as fast as I can, because all these other birds are harassing me. Same thing with the Ferruginous Pygmy-Owls. They don't seem to have as many things harassing them. The curve-billed thrashers are definitely the worst ones for them. The Gilas and the flickers, they kind of yell at them, but they don't really go. I didn't see them going after them. And everything else, all these guys, a lot of times tell you that they're coming. Oh yeah, they're the rufous-winged sparrows are agitated over there and must be coming in or whatever. Now, if these woodpeckers were to land on the saguaro that the owl's nesting in, the owl will chase them off. There are predators out there. There was a Cooper's hawk that was following the screech owls relatively closely, so that one that we lost that 1 year probably was that. Coatimundis are in the area where the mountain pygmy-owls are. The Ferruginous Pygmy-Owls, if you think about where they're living, there really aren't that many things out there that could get them, except western screech owls. That's probably the biggest predator of the Pygmy-Owls out there. Because you don't normally see very many red tails, or you don't see many Cooper's hawks out in the desert. There's some red tails out there, and I guess they could get one. So it seems like the Ferruginous probably have less problems with predators than the northern owls, yes.
What about like the Harrises? Do they ever hunt them?
You know,
Observe them?
it kind of goes back to, these owls are small and fast.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it could happen, but is a Harris going to spend that much time trying to capture something that's that small? Yes.
Are hole sizes ever low enough for snakes?
Snakes could certainly, for sure.
That you've seen low?
I have not seen it, but I've seen snakes climbing,
Right.
and I've seen them climbing trees. I've never seen them in any of the nests I've watched.
Elevations of poles are range from what to what on the saguaros?
Normally they're in that 20-ish range height-wise, but a lot of them will be higher than that. The other thing, like with Ferruginous, and again, going back to the males with the most cavities seem to do better. They nest in it's almost like every time you find a nest, it's in the biggest, most obvious saguaro in the neighborhood with more arms and more holes. So when I go out looking for them, I'm looking for that one saguaro that stands out, and then I go. Actually, going back to that question about a Harris hawk, I have seen these guys bring hummingbirds to the nest. So again, that's one of those things like, wow, that's
Pretty fast.
a small return on a fairly large investment. But my screech owls have done the same thing. 3 times I've seen them bring in hummingbirds, which is
On average, how far away are your observing stations?
Depends on, my observing stations are the place I can stand and not have to move. Because the way I do things is I set up and I stand there. I have the remote trigger in my hand. I'm not saying, oh, here it comes. Because as soon as you do that, you're gonna wait a while. I find the best angle and I just stand there and I have the remote trigger in my hand.
Oh, you don't try to camouflage or anything, no?
I try to keep my movements to a minimum. I don't wear bright clothing. I try to be muted colors, stuff like that, but I don't wear camouflage. They know I'm there. I'm not sneaking up on anybody. So the big thing is I go and I typically stand in the same place. I get there at the same time. So after that initial point, they kind of know who I am. Now I'm going to talk about some other things in a bit. So fledging, what does fledging mean? Most of us think fledging means leaving the nest, right? That's not actually right. Fledging means I'm able to fly. So a lot of owls leave the nest before they can fly. They're not fledging. They're either branching or leaving the nest. So great gray, spotted owls, great horned owls. A lot of the more platform type owls branch. Most of the cavity nesters fledge. Now when they leave the nest, they may not be great flyers, but they're capable of flying. So watching the Pygmy-Owls fledge, it was kind of fun because they kind of, what I've seen, they're all doing the same thing. It's like they're there and they're like, okay, and they fly to, essentially it looks like they're flying into the leaves. It's like, that looks soft, I'm gonna hit that spot, and that's kind of what they're doing. And again, I'm not saying that's the way they all do it. This is what I've observed. So with these guys, the first year I was watching them, 2 chicks fledged one day, so one fledged in the morning, one fledged in the afternoon. The third chick didn't fledge the next day, he waited till the day after. So for a day and a half, 2 chicks are out of the nest and 1 chick's in the nest. So the day after the 2 chicks fledged, they were probably 150 meters up the side of the mountain, way, way up, and I didn't go anywhere near them. This is a super tight crop shot from where I was standing. So this is the female feeding the chick. And this is the larger of the 2 chicks coming over and saying, hey, wait, mom, feed me first. But there was still another chick in the nest. So from my observations, the chicks kind of stay together until everybody's out, and then they move a ways from the nest. Typically after the third one leaves, I can't find them again. And I don't spend a lot of time trouncing around looking for them. I don't want to leave scent trails. I don't want to be bothering them. Once they're done nesting, I pretty much leave them alone. So with this guy, this is the third one to leave. He was in there screaming his head off. Mom, feed me, and she wasn't. And she didn't feed him all morning. And I'm thinking, man. And the other thing you'll hear a lot about owls is that the female will sit outside and call them and say, hey, come on out, I've got food for you, or offer them food from the outside. I've never seen that happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It's not happening when I'm around. So this last guy fledged, same thing, dove into some leaves, stood up there screaming his head off, Mom, come help me. Then it flew down and landed on the ground. When it hit the ground, the jays came in. And they were just all over this owl. So do you interfere in a situation like that? The right answer probably is no. But these are my family. After I've spent this much time with them, these aren't just some owls, these are my family. So yes, what I did is I walked over and I sat a little closer than I normally would have to where the owl was, and the jays left him alone. And then I just sat there, and after a while, he walked over to this tree, and he kind of flapped and climbed the trees using his talons as spikes, and he climbed the tree and sat up on top, calling again. This went on for probably an hour. And then after about an hour, I heard a call from 25 meters away. It wasn't one I recognized, but I'm assuming it was the female, because right after that, he flew to where she was, and then I left. It's like, you know what? I've been around enough. I don't want to interfere with them feeding. I don't want to interfere with anything. So I left, and hopefully they did okay.
At that stage, it's only the female feeding?
No, the male's still feeding, but the male still brings the food. From my observation, the male still brings the food to the female, and the female feeds the chicks. So when the chicks are in the nest, I don't think they are strong enough to tear food apart. My screech owls can't. I've seen them try, but they can't. Or they haven't. I'll say they can't. They haven't. So where do you find them? For me, Pygmy-Owls, northern Pygmy-Owls, I'm looking in the aspens. You know, and I'm just going up and listening and hoping I hear them. Mountain Pygmy-Owls, I go into the sycamores and just hang out and listen. Ferruginous Pygmy-Owls, I go down into the desert with saguaros, and typically where I'm finding them, there aren't a ton of saguaros around. Sometimes there are, but usually they're in areas that look like this, just a small little ravine, and they're doing, my observation, they're doing most of their hunting down in this stuff. And then they pick the biggest saguaro in that neighborhood. They seem like they like to have grasslands around their saguaros. And I go and I sit and I listen for them. Right? And then in the spring, they're calling. They're calling like crazy. You don't need to call. If they're breeding and you're patient, if you just go sit, you don't have to call them. So when you're looking for Pygmy-Owls, you're not looking for big owls sitting on the side of a thing. These guys are this big. So what you're looking for is something that doesn't fit. You're looking for like a little ball stuck up in the side of the tree. And northern Pygmy-Owls, mountain Pygmy-Owls, they're usually 10 to 15 to 20 feet up. Ferruginous Pygmy-Owls are low. They're 10 feet below. And they don't fly high. So yes, the border wall is a problem for Pygmy-Owls. Could they fly over the wall? Sure. Will they? Probably not. Okay, so there's one of those things. It's like, because you think, well, it's a bird, it'll just fly over. And it's like, well, if it's in that enough shape, well, it's gonna fly over. And it's like, no, it's not. It's not part of their behavior. So, I'm not gonna talk about ethics, because when I say something is ethical or not ethical, I'm saying, I'm describing a person. I call it best field practices. What maybe you should avoid doing. I'm not an expert. I've blundered a bunch of times in the field where I've spooked things like, oh, that's wrong. But the biggest thing is be patient. If you want to get a shot of a bird flying, if you walk up to it and flush it, you're getting a butt shot of it flying away. You're not going to get a nice shot of it flying. So what you want to do is you want to, first of all, enjoy being out there, enjoy the experience, and if you can't, maybe think of something else to do, because you really don't want to stress these guys. And you don't want to, I don't call them. I try not to approach, and I try to know, and I'm watching their behavior. And I haven't seen northern Pygmy-Owls do it, but Ferruginous Pygmy-Owls, when they get disturbed, they twitch their tail back and forth like this. It's just real obvious. It's like, ooh, something's going on. And if I'm walking up and I see that, I always stop and I think, am I doing that or is something else doing that? Because something else could be disturbing and then it's not me. So there are things you just look for. Keep in mind that if I disturb this female and if she doesn't make it, I killed everybody. I didn't just kill a female, right? When I'm going up into these areas, the jays know I'm there. The jays are watching what I'm looking at. So they know that I'm there and they're looking for what I'm looking for. So try to keep everything to a minimum. Take care of your subjects. Thank you. So, I think we're right on time. If you have any questions, be glad to answer them. Yes?
The eyes that are on the back of the head, are they fully functioning?
No, they're just feathers.
Oh, okay.
So they just look like eyes.
Okay.
I was just gonna share, so I have a friend who has, we're pretty sure they're pygmies in their backyard that live in mesquite trees in northern Scottsdale. They come every season, but then they go away, you know? So I don't know, like, you think maybe they're in the owls the rest of the time, or?
Could you repeat the question?
Okay.
So she's just making a statement that she
Yeah.
gets owls.
Well, cause we're not aware of any Saguaro, but they do live, their backyard faces the wash, and of course there's Saguaro through there, but the owls constantly come back to the mesquite tree, and it's a huge mesquite tree.
Okay. Yeah.
But
So outside of Phoenix, a friend of hers has a mesquite tree that the owls come and nest in. And she was wondering, and they think they're Pygmy-Owls. Probably not. More likely it's an elf owl or a screech owl.
Size-wise, what would be the difference?
Elf owls are slightly smaller, and they've got a really stubby tail. And screech owls are about 8 inches. Pygmy-Owls are that big.
that's probably
Elf
an
owls
elf.
are that big
Yeah,
without a
it's
tail.
probably an elf, because they're small.
Okay, a good chance they're elf owls. Not likely Pygmy-Owls.
The mortality rate must be pretty high then, if they're having 4 and 5 eggs and we're not having an explosion of them in the environment, there must be a really high mortality rate after
Yes.
they fledge.
There is.
All species.
And especially the first couple of weeks. They say like the first couple of weeks, probably 60% of them don't make it.
How long does she continue to feed them
About a
then?
month.
About
A month.
a month.
So they continue to feed them for about a month. And then they just kind of. Thank you.
Thank you.